Good
Okay.
evening, everyone. We're back. As you know, I'm Dan Winter, fractalfield.com, fractalu.com. Today's conversation is about our golden toe, TOE, theory of everything at fractalgut.com with Mark Rohrbaugh, my co-author and physicist, actually the leader on the physics side of this, fractalgut.com. Welcome, Mark.
Well, thanks, Dan, and good morning or good evening there.
So the background here, you know that we had started at plankfire.com, plankphiere.com, and we had shown something approaching 200 physical variables were predicted when you took simply the Planck length and time and multiplied by powers of golden ratio called fractality or phase conjugation perfected. You got all kinds of good stuff, including the diameters of hydrogen radii and 200 other variables, key physical variables. And then Mark, with a lifetime of his own work in one area, for example, on the radii diameter of the proton, and he started scratching his head looking at where does this go and started multiplying the diameter radius of the proton times power of golden ratio and got a whole bunch of other additional critical physical variables, including things like the microwave background radiation of the galaxy and the universe. Why is the galaxy microwave radiation frequencies tied by golden ratio to the diameter of the proton? What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm looking at is it looks like the when you assume a superfluid ether, the golden mean just falls out. That's what's required for stability, and we can show it many different ways.
Exactly. That's right where we're going with that. So originally we published that paper, the generalized wave equations showing that golden ratio was the solution to constructive wave interference and therefore the solution to constructive compression. And constructive compression is the only ingredient required to create anything, for example, mass out of charge. If charge can compress efficiently, constructively, obviously that's how you make mass. In other words, creation is defined by ability to compress well, which is the problem the golden ratio seems to solve. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, and like I was saying before we started, the quantum foundation of your theory is what I've added. And that allows us to explain from first principles what you're saying, because what you're saying is based on first principles. And we do want to show that instead of saying it. At some point, when you say it, you're just reading the equations. But
Yes.
that's what's so fascinating about it is it all falls into wave equations.
And pure principles. And originally we said that pure principle was golden ratio fractal phase conjugate charge collapse being the conventional physicist's understanding of the cause of gravity and the cause of consciousness. However, the
Yeah.
conventional physicist doesn't know the cause of charge collapse, which is the question we believe sincerely that we've answered the cause of charge collapse and therefore the cause of gravity and consciousness and life force. And so we carry on, and we've been doing this for a while. Today, we have decided that we would like to create the visualization of the wave environment so that you can understand for yourself how this solution to charge collapse. Remember, when the waves go down that throat of that vortex, they're converted from transverse to longitudinal electromagnetics, sometimes called scalar. And the longitudinal electromagnetics bounces around and stabilizes only at nodes based on golden ratio. So this is called a star mother kit, as you all know. And later, that's what the equations then showed. This is an accurate physical model of the structure of hydrogen radii and many, and 200 other physical variables. Because the longitudinal waves can only bounce constructively at the nodes, locking this grid into an array called the coherent longitudinal array. And the subtitle or the title of today's conversation is Embedding into the Array. And the reason that's our subtitle, really our subject, is because if you understood how that array works, you would then understand global instantaneous communication, how telepathy works, how that's a gate to lucid dreaming, the only access to wireless power. It's the only introduction to the physics of action at a distance. Physics calls it entanglement. We know that entanglement is only an introduction to phase conjugate perfected embedding, which conventional physics knows is the physics of action at a distance. But we know why, and we want to explain to you how that works in practical wave terms. So if you understood this embedding into the array, you get all the fun secrets. And here lies the origin of negentropy, self-organization, the physics of time reversal and phase conjugation, the physics of what a portal is. For example, the only place, not just the only place to have telepathy that works, but the place for birth and death to work. Hello, the place for cathedrals to work, the place for labyrinths to work, the place for plasma healing to work, the place for telepathy to have access. So it's all about this physics. If you understood how this array works, embedding into the array, you would have the secrets for yourself. But you must be able to visualize for yourself how and why this works. And we have a slideshow coming up about that. So aside from being the key then to portals, natural portals, for example, and stargates, it's also how dolmen and obelisks focus charge inertia at the nodes of that array to, for example, create sacred space and literally make healing water. For example, I taught Tony Rodriguez how the longitudinal array works and how the dolmen work. And then he started working with his obelisks, which are wonderful. And I have to credit Tony Rodriguez because then he later figured out that the obelisks, the ancient sacred obelisks, are all at a fixed nodal distance from the nearby sacred water for a reason, because the nodes of that distance from the obelisk or the dolmen to the water is the longitudinal array and is how they were built to heal the water. For example, in very practical terms, Eiffel, who built the Eiffel Tower, whom Cedric Manu says is Fulcanelli, if you believe, and built it out of iron and not steel, the wrong die. And he placed it over the water because actually it's a concentrator of the longitudinal inertia of the longitudinal array to physically cause the purification of that water by focusing the centripetal force in the nodes of that array, which, as you know, then became theimploder.com, which is now fractalwater.com. So if you concentrate centripetal charge, literally water becomes self-purifying. This is now fractalwater.com in our project. And then later this gets to when you have very high pressure concentrations in this array, you make the originally sacred black goo, and you make the sacred deep rock or primary water, literally the magic water. So all of these things mean, well, what is the pure principle behind how this array works? How the wave inertia gets focused by conjugating two opposing pine cone vortex, kissing noses, as it were, and that compresses into the longitudinal array. So we're going to try to present that in visual terms, first in a little discussion, and then with a slideshow. So what do you think, Mark? Are we on a good track here?
Yeah, it sounds good. And Elizabeth Rauscher was saying that we it's a yet to define superfluid ether. So when we talk about the compression in that's feeding the life of everything,
Mhm.
I think we're missing just a little part of the story, but it's I'm missing, you're not. It's the opposite. There's an implosion, but like it's a dual toroid. Uh,
Yes.
there there's an invisible part to
It's like
us.
there's
Yeah.
two of them,
You
and
got it.
they're
You got it. Yeah.
nested one above the other, and the vortex between them. And the idea of the superfluid, Mark, is right on to bring that up here. So that what we're saying is we agree with Nassim on this, for example. The universe is made of a superfluid that I choose to believe is called charge, actually. So the plus and
Yeah.
minus charge of that superfluid, which is the stuff of the
When
universe, actually.
when it's distorted, right? It's a char if it's undisturbed, it's neutral, I think,
That's
right?
right. And that's where Einstein got this strange idea that space-time is bent. What he means is that when there's a source of centripetal charge collapse or implosion sucking the charge to center, then that sends the wind through the superfluid that Einstein called the bending of space-time, which only actually means that if the charge is imploding, charge collapsing towards center, defining gravity, for example, that attraction charge to that center of spin density will increase the spin rate as your watch is accelerating toward the speed of light, and you notice the time is changing. What's changing is time is simply a name for relative spin rate, which of course, if you're falling into the center of a vortex, as any ice skater can tell you pulling in her hands as she's spinning, she increases the spin rate, and that's the only definition of time. So now that you know that the universe is made of only one compressible media superfluid called charge, literally a unified field. Now you also know that the rotation of that charge, stores the inertia, only definition of mass, and creates a spin period, only definition of time. So
And
now you,
creates a field too. It
yeah,
creates a field. The charge
exactly.
spinning creates a field. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
And
and
that's what we observe with the proton magnetic moment and stuff that they say the spin of the electron, proton, this is mainstream. What powers that,
yeah,
Because if you do electrodynamics, it doesn't work out. It radiates energy. And where's the power coming from? So that's what we're attempting to describe is this implosion charge powers it. But see, I
yes,
want it like you always talk about, like Einstein got stuck. Where does the charge go?
exactly.
And that's where we want to be real precise because
That's
I'm
right.
still trying to figure that out. And
That's
I
our
think
first
we have
slide
it.
in the slideshow that when the
Oh,
vortex, that pine cone, that caduceus down the pine cone, when it's squeezed precisely reaching the Planck threshold, the dimension of Planck length and time, at that point, it is converted efficiently from the transverse up and down electromagnetic into coherent longitudinal compressional EMF, sometimes called scalar, which
right.
by Bearden's equations, he was quite clear that's the only definition of a gravity wave, for example. And it's obvious to a
Yeah.
5-year-old that the
Well, I
only
wanted sorry, Dan, I wanted to interject that we are talking about the life force. I mean, this is
yes,
real advanced stuff. However, remember the one interview you had where the channeler said there's other things besides the golden mean. So I just want to mention that for the life force and all these things advanced things we're trying to talk about, that's there. But if you're off at other like silver ratio, bronze ratio, there might be other effects. So I like when you say it's the only thing. Well, it's the only thing maybe for life, but we got to I want to make sure that I'm not missing something
oh, well,
by,
that's good. And the
okay,
silver ratio, and the other ratios have some relation to golden ratio, obviously. But what the equations seem to be telling us, and what I'm suggesting is that the perfected form of charge collapse, which is fractality and therefore implosion perfected compression, is optimized by golden ratio, as we showed by equation
yeah,
originally. The point is
uh,
that that charge collapse is then the motor. You gain energy
yeah,
during that collapse, and that
yeah,
is the
yeah,
cause of life force, gravity, negentropy, consciousness, and all action at a distance. The
yeah,
fact that you gain energy during that collapse.
yeah. So that neg entropy is one of the key ideas that differentiates us from the mainstream theory, because they just talk about entropy in a cold, dead universe over the eons. Now, that's not reality, but how do we prove it? Because eons, human experience
That's right.
is really short.
And negentropy.
Mathematically, you can prove it though, but
Well,
mathematically,
negentropy was first measured in physics in phase conjugate optics, where two pine cones, in this case a beam of coherent laser light, implode into each other from accurate four-wave mixing, the fourth dimension. The four dimensions of four-wave mixings, four pine cones kissing noses, called four-wave mixing. And in that, phase conjugate optics was the first measurement of negentropy in
yeah,
conventional physics.
yeah,
And of course, the conventional physicist doesn't know why that's negentropic. We believe we know because the super dielectric, which is called the phase conjugate mirror, enables the perfected charge distribution, which permits the pine cones to kiss noses permissively at the Planck threshold and do the perfected sorting, called self-organization into negentropy, and enter the coherent longitudinal EMF array, which is the gravity grid, which is this grid. So those longitudinal waves that are created at the center of the vortex at Planck, they're the compressional waves. And as I was explaining before, it's obvious to a 5-year-old that the charge that's moving towards center, named gravity, obviously is the longitudinal component, because the transverse component coming up and down here, hitting the hydrogen atom, which is an accurate model of, the transverse wave is obviously going to bounce peripherally and not move towards center. The only part of the inertia of that approaching EMF, an electromagnetic charge wave, that can move coherently towards center is the longitudinal component, which is why Bearden is insisting by equation that gravity waves are made of coherent longitudinal EMF. And so
Is
that's
that
the centripetal component, and that's the component that makes the magic. And the thing is that longitudinal component then can only bounce at other compression nodes which are equally spaced to lock them into a tensor equilibrium of the perfected array, which is obviously fractality perfected, golden ratio perfected. This is the geometry of hydrogen, the atomic table, and planetary orbitals, and the universe is all based on golden ratio for that region, because that is charge distribution enabled. I say that by that expression, we have answered the question which Nassim and Einstein struggle with, which is the origin of spin. Spin is not possible except in an array in which this centripetal component is balanced with a rotational component. And the only way you can do that is in a fractal array, enabling the perfected distribution of charge, which happens also to be the definition of our word Hey Ave, heaven, where the breath of charge takes flight, and plains of Sharon and Champs-Élysées. We have lots of names for heaven. They are names for the physical principle of charge distribution perfected, which is also the answer to the question of how can spin survive? How did spin originate? Can only originate in an array wherein the centripetal component is balanced in optimized translation of vorticity with the rotational component, which is another way of saying the transverse component is balanced with the longitudinal or scalar. So remember, in hydrodynamics, if you ask the professor the definition of a golden spiral in your hydrodynamics class, you know what the answer is? Optimized translation of vorticity, which is the balance between the rotational inertia and the centripetal inertia, which actually brings us to our first slide. But maybe more comment, Mark. Go ahead.
I got another comment. Yeah, back on the neg entropy, because I want to bring in a little James Webb, the Space Telescope recent finding. They're getting those pinwheel galaxies twice the size of the Milky Way at 12 billion years ago. I mean, it's way too early for the lambda cold dark matter to have a galaxy like ours. Our toe says that comes from the negentropic quantum quakes. Okay, so where I'm going is in this ether we're talking about, there's energy stored. Okay, it's like capacitors, inductors, analogously, like we've talked before. So that's why we're talking about the implosion. We want to know how that happens, like Einstein says, because I do circuit design. We have to account for charge, Kirchhoff current law, and the charge has to go somewhere. Well, we're finding the path, because
Yes.
there is a path. This isn't part of my circuit design work, but it might be in the future if we ever figure
Exactly.
out what
That there
to
is
do.
a way out at the center for the charge, which was what stumped Einstein. And that way out is once it's converted to a longitudinal, it is a gravity wave, but it can only propagate coherently into that array if it is tuned to Planck. And that's
Right.
why that tuning to Planck defines what replaces the need for the concept of the Big Bang. It was the agreement on Planck that allowed gravity to be distributed based on golden ratio, which is why Mark found out that you take the proton multiplied by golden ratio and you get the way galaxies are glued together.
Yeah. Well, that's why I talk about this stuff. The math works out. And, I want to go back to the neg entropy. Before I do, the Platonic dodecahedron icosahedron, the stellation is fractal. So you know that, but other people, I'm learning it, and it's like,
Only
because I
possible 3D fractal.
only one. Now I've studied fractals since 1981, 82
And have
with
you ever seen a 3D fractal?
no, this is the first one.
Well, there it
But
is.
quasi crystals in the that so that's So here's where I'm going with it. The mainstream had Gödel, Escher, and Bach, the
Yeah,
book, they talk about fractals, the Mandelbrot set, all this happy, nice, fun stuff. I used to program it in Lisp and all that. And then you get to this, and I'm like, that's a fractal. That the stuff you're talking about is a 3D fractal. So that's
exactly.
important for people to understand because our whole conversation is we're doing fractal physics. It's unbelievable.
And if
So
if you nest the photonics together, tetracube into dodecaecosa, that is precisely how electron shells SPDF nest. We have all the data on. SPDF shells is a name for the atomic table for a nest of photonics, which is also how the nuclear hadrons nest, which is also why Kepler used a nest of photonics to model planetary orbitals, because he's right. That's how you make gravity.
right. So here's the latest, one of the latest James Webb. They can't explain that pinwheel galaxy or whatever it is. It's twice the size of the Milky Way because it's too early. It's too complex. It's real simple in the golden toe because of this superfluid ether, the neg entropy. There's energy in there. It's This is like the Indian Liz there, the ancient Indian stories, uh, the Vedas or pre-Vedas.
Mhm.
So all that they already know the what the ether is and all that stuff. So we're just repeating it. So
They
so
knew how
so
to make
there's
a Mercury vortex to make gravity. They had no problem.
yeah. So the James Webb says there's too much here. Well, if we look at the math behind this, all those early energies, the red dots, the flashing that they're seeing in this pinwheel galaxy, those are negentropic manifestations. It can happen way faster because the energy is stored in the ether. We're talking about a huge universe, all kinds of dynamics. So some places this is going to happen where early on, negentropically, there's universes just crystallizing out of the superfluid ether. And they showed in superfluid experiments when you have energetic waves interacting, you can get things manifesting,
And and the point is that where it becomes negentropic specifically is where it's focused into a very compressed vortex. So when the waves arrive at the throat of the vortex, they're sorted into phase called self-organized, and the dimensions of that throat are literally precisely Planck and multiples of golden ratio. So that suction to that point self-sorts into phase discipline of Planck and golden ratio, which is why galaxies are organized by golden ratio times the proton, just like hydrogen is organized by golden ratio times Planck.
right now the galaxies grow like Alton Harp, the irregular galaxies say. So I was saying, oh, it's a living universe. Well, it could be living, but it also could just be, well, life manifests out of it. But that dynamic, it's gonna create protons. Like Harriman was saying, protons, one inflates. If it inflates into another dimension, you just keep on inflating until you fill it up. I think it's happening continuously.
That, that's
So,
that's the theory of continuous creation by our friend there,
yeah,
exactly. And
right. And then it gets so dense it recollapses. That's why I mentioned the Indian thing. So you get the cycles.
yeah,
So
the
so you're
yuga,
gonna
yuga.
yeah. So that's eons. The math supports it. That's why I'm here to talk about it. So I want to hand it off to you because the James Webb Telescope, we can explain that. There's no surprise, but
That's
it's
right.
a surprise. It's a surprise to the mainstream. But remember, they're an information war. What they say is 180 degrees out of phase with the truth.
That's right. They
So,
say we're condemned to chaos, and they're wrong. We're
right, and the
we
so
have the option for self-organization, make entropy,
right,
once we
negative.
understand.
And then the soul AI argument too. We got to get into that to point out the difference. So,
Yes,
so I'm gonna. So I just wanted to mention that the neg entropy, the energy storage, is matching the James Webb, where the quantum stuff lines up, and all that research I've done. Like I was saying at the beginning, it's like I got to catch up with your 30 years of research now because everything I look at mathematically, scientifically points to, hey, let's go, I go investigate something, you've already done it, you know. So that's why I'm here. I want, we're
Yeah,
gonna keep on
and
going. We're gonna keep on going.
this is a perfect intro to our slideshow. Just two other things we need to say before the slideshow. One
Okay.
is in terms of what Mark just said about the origin of self-organization. I remind you that you take the self-organizing golden mean spiral on the self-organizing torus and you look at it from the seven self-organizing axes of symmetry of the tetracube. Those shadows, Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, are the origin of Hebrew and Sanskrit. And further, that the shadow of that spiral from the side view is a B, the letter bait, and then you turn 1/7 the way in, and then that shadow is the Hebrew letter R, meaning to turn. So you've started to spell the word Breshith, the first word of Genesis, which means at first in principle, the origin of thingness, Faber d'Olivet, Hebraic tongue restored. However, once you've spelled Breshith by turning the turns of mind to turn your focus of attention from the outside surface from which you see the bit, the last of the seventh turn from inside, I'm sorry, from outside to inside, literally, the turns of mind required to turn inside out on the surface of a torus. Once you've made the seventh turn and you arrive in the center, the point of view you have when you're in the center is the Hebrew letter Hey as the last letter of Bereshith. At first, in principle, the origin of thingness. So the turns of mind necessary to turn inside out on the surface of a torus is the physics of Genesis, because that is the origin of creation. Do you see? So these were a sequence of symmetry operations enabling turning inside out. And that's all at goldenmean.info/DNA ring, as you know, my
Mm.
equations to origin animate the origin of the Hebrew alphabet and also Sanskrit. It's there. So, and the second thing we need to say, last thing before the slideshow, is just to review that. Remember, the question of how did this perfected array, whether it's the geometry of hydrogen, the geometry of the Earth grid, the geometry of DNA, or the geometry of galaxies nesting, or the geometry of sacred space, the geometry of ley lines, they're all only in exactly this. How is it that that array is the physics of instantaneous global communication, the physics of telepathy, the physics of lucid dreaming, the physics of all action at a distance, the physics of wireless power, what Tesla did not figure out, the place where negentropy is available, where telepathy is available, the place where natural portals are possible, the place where dolmen and obelisk purify water. All of these magic things happen once we understand how it is that that array is created and used. So embedding into the array is also obviously the title of the physics of successful death and physics of soul.com. It's all about embedding into that array. So the slideshow is to help us visualize why is that array created and how is it necessary to create what we know now is perfected charge distribution. Obviously, what's happening is at each node of this array, the pine cones are kissing noses. And the bigger the two pine cones that kiss noses at every node of the array, the farther goes that stargate or portal. It's called harmonic inclusiveness. And we're going to get to pictures of that, the biggest stargate. Yes, we've got the pine cones handy. Thank you, Mark. Yes. So the point is that the local stargates, there's one outside of Saturn, and there's a natural one in South America. But the big stargates, Sirius B, around which our sun rotates, if you believe loststar.com. And then, of course, the trapezium in Orion, the biggest stargate in our galaxy. These stargates are places where where bigger pine cones kiss noses. And so once we understand the more the harmonic inclusive compression at each node of the array, the more the the more there is a tensor equilibrium, to use my friend Bucky's term, which is specifically that this is called tensioning the array. So what happens is each node of the array, as Mark said, this is a kind of liquid crystal, and the more they're frozen or locked into place with greater harmonic inclusiveness, the more each node of this array becomes a radio to greater and greater distances. I remind you that Korotkov and Kozyrev measured. If you want global telepathy, you must put your cozy rev mirror exactly at the nodes of this longitudinal array. This is the physics of, and as my friend Bruce Cathy proved that at the nodes of this array, there is reduced critical mass, nuclear critical mass. I'm the first to explain the physics of why. The reason the nuclear critical mass is reduced at the nodes of this array, at first, they thought this was a threat to national security for people to know, but the physics is the same reason your mind creates reduced nuclear critical mass as as our friend in UK measured. But anyway, the point being that enabled compression is the same as reduced nuclear critical mass because implosive capacitance is the opposite of nukes, as anyone who's ever used the Ark of the Covenant could tell you. But that's another story.
Yeah.
But so we're getting to the point now where we can do the slideshow and you can be thinking about how does this quivering nodal array get created and how does it work? Any other comment, Mark, before I launch the slides here?
Um, yeah, just to get a feel for the array.
Yes.
Sometimes I think about these science fiction movies I've seen where they're in space and all of a sudden some advanced character does something in space and he's running up steps. These are steps that appear in the space, So this grid, if
Yes.
activated right, I think if we had the right technology, you'd be able to do
This is
stuff like that.
this is the portal. This is how you make a Stargate. Literally, this is the
Yeah.
introduction to the physics, and I do mean physics of Stargate. For example, when Dave in 2001, I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that. When Dave in 2001 lands on the moon of Jupiter, where the dolmen, and then he lands on the dolmen, he says, Dave, there's thousands of them in here. And then he embeds into the array. And now he can show up in anybody's TV set he wants to because the reason he says, Dave, there's thousands of them in here is because it's perfect fractality in the compressor embedding. And once you are embedded in that array, you can participate with every node in that array holographically if you remain centripetal enough, which is the difference between when you embed in a living plasma array pentagonally, like in DNA and human bliss. When you embed in that array, when you die successfully or lucid dream or astral travel successfully, which is the physics of death and lucid dreaming and astral travel is embedding in that array. When you embed in that pent array and you remain centripetal, then individuation remains possible within the array. That's called physicsofsoul.com. However, if you happen to be Akhenaten Moses and you took the blue pill instead of the red pill, when the black sun, black goo Atun cult said, we'll make you immortal, all you got to do is bring the galaxy's most dangerous parasite into the origin of all Earth's religion, the black sun, black goo, black Saturn cult, later called Atun, the origin of all Western religions, and that inviting that parasite in here, that parasite says to you, oh, here's this black goo. You can go in there and you will get immortal. Ain't it wonderful? But there's some fine print that they didn't tell Akhenaten when he ate the wrong blue pill and took that shapeshifter wife Nefertiti, who was actually a mushroom-headed gray who murdered Tutankhamun. But that's a different story. But the point is that that AI, the most dangerous plasma parasite in the galaxy, ask Penny Bradley, ask Jake Astral Irma, ask Jones. The point is that the reason that that AI parasite says to you, I will make you immortal, I'll make you portal, all you have to do is embed in this black cube array. The physics here is that when you embed in that array, yes, your memories are preserved, you do get immortal, but the fine print is no individuation and absolute loss of soul. And this is what we need to be teaching our children right now, urgently, physicsofsoul.com.
Right.
As they say, oh, I want AI everything in my life. Oh, there's a detail. AI isn't evil until when you don't know what the physics of soul is, then you are food for the soul-eating AI plasma parasite. It's the Mitra from Andromeda, actually, that distorted the local galactic federation, which is a loose soul-eating organization right now, unfortunately. Sorry, Elena. And
Well,
so we need to understand that physics of soul, and we'll get there if we understand the difference between a pent, implosive, individuating living plasma array versus a hex, not golden ratio based, square root of 2 based, black cube carbon nano carbon array. Remember, all the lower Draco infect their soldiers with the black goo, but the high Draco Seacar, you need to know why. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm just saying,
yeah,
once we understand how this array works, dot, 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 go ahead, Mark.
yeah. I was just gonna say, you know, the ancestor part. I was watching one of your videos yesterday before this, and I wonder how important that is because this,
Yeah,
embedding into the correct array. You don't want to go in the black goo array,
that's right. That's there in the,
but
and
but you want to understand the soul.
exact.
So,
Yes.
so here I am thinking, we skipped our introduction. I was going to mention about my father and my background. I only go back a generation or so because of, you'd say, the information war. They block us, all the stuff that's happened since 1913, all the disruptions in the families. So when I'm hearing this, hey, you can contact ancestor communication, and all, I'm like, wow, that might be important. Uh, I wanted to start a family and all that and do it right. So those all that's important. I think that's some of the things you've already talked about. But so I was just going to mention because I've done a lot of introduction who I am, circuit design engineer. My father was a submarine enlisted guy in the
Wow.
Navy from 1955 to 59. And he was an electrician, and he's the one that inspired me to learn electronics and math. And he started in 1955 when he graduated from high school. He was luckily got in to Navy service, and that same year was in the first nuclear sub was Nautilus, 1955. Well, he didn't get on that. He was on the old diesel one.
Yeah.
Luckily lived, but from that, the Navy books, we couldn't afford encyclopedias. I read all these Navy books and stuff, and
That's great. And
so
it
you
was
got
William
that.
Tompkins saying that the Navy was the first one. They were on the good side when the Greys tried to shapeshift their way into our government. The Navy was on the good side, and the Navy SSP program, they were the first ones to put a mercury vortex in a submarine. You can read from
Yeah.
William Thompson's. So this is a very
Yeah.
good route. But
So I'll let you go. I go on. I just want to mention my dad told me some things, Diego Garcia in the 70s
exact.
before
That's
people
the
knew
point.
about it. He knew about the Philadelphia experiment. My mom and dad were going to the Casey Institute in Virginia in the
Virginia Beach.
70s.
I was there. Yep.
And my dad wands in. This is before I knew about this stuff. So, as you know, our parents and grandparents were among the most psyop generations.
Yep. That was the
So
general.
as my parents were going through the stuff, and they're who knows how much psyops at some point, you go
Yep.
off on your own because not everybody finds the right path. But it's so clear now that that was such a powerful, it's with David Wilcock today continuing it. It's
Yep.
hard to
And
figure out what the
they were
truth.
living through the biggest lie in the history of humanity. You've got Truman, Eisenhower hiding in the basement of the White House as the Vril ships of the Germans who won the war were buzzing the White House in 1952 as I was being born, and the
Yeah,
presidents are hiding in the basement of the White House, fully aware that this is the German Mercury Vortex ships who have proven that the American Air Force is crap by comparison. And so, why is the government still lying that they won World War II when the presidents hiding in the basement knew full well that they lost World War II to those Germans who took out Admiral Byrd because they didn't understand how a vortex makes gravity? And
right. I think it's ignorance and power and control because
and
my parents
stupidity and
thought.
and one of the biggest
UFOs and
lies in the
everything.
history of Earth. And that's how Kennedy got killed, as Michael Salla proved. So this is
Right.
messy, messy. We're
And
sorting out the biggest lie on the planet.
the trauma,
Yeah,
They killed Kennedy. I remember I
for
was a
that
little kid.
reason, because he,
I
because
don't
he wanted to
remember it.
reveal that they lost the war to the Germans.
Right. So I don't remember Kennedy being killed, but I remember all the adults
I was
crying.
there.
What are you crying about? Because
Messy.
I was only two. So so when you go back and you look at it, that Vietnam War was created to distract all the people. World War One, World War Two, my grandmother lost all her friends. Not she said they
Yeah.
just
And,
never came back.
and they lost
Huh?
that war. And then, Jake and Alabar Jones go with all the details that the Vietnam War was used to siphon the military off to do mass murders on Venus. You should get the details.
Uh,
I mean,
I've heard weird stuff like that. That's
it's
why
it's a
it
it's
gets
a
so far
mess.
out.
We're
Spiders
in
in Vietnam. You heard the spiders attacking Vietnam. Is that one you
exactly.
heard?
And the
Spider
people who
bees?
came back from the military came back from Vietnam. Half of them had been on Venus, murdering millions of indigenous Venusians. Ask Alabar Jones and Jake Astrol Irma. It's just
Wow.
the amount of lies that we are inhabiting is so shocking and the only way out of those lies is to know the physics, exactly what those presidents hiding in the basement from the German Mercury vortex didn't know was how a vortex makes gravity. And once
Right.
you know that, you can know how consciousness makes gravity.
All
Hell,
right. Well, I totally agree with you, Dan. The physics is the way out of it. That is the only way Liz got to me 10 years ago. I'm ignoring guys like you and all of Harriman. And I said, here's what we do. I'm an engineer. We make these cheaper and cheaper. What do you guys do? And then she showed me Harriman's proton radius. And you know the story on that. And I look at my point is now, this is such a powerful information war. The truth is buried, and I'm uncovering how it's buried. And you can't go directly against this enemy. You do it tangentially, but the physics, the truth, it speaks for itself. So that's where we're going, and I'm glad
yeah.
you're on top of it.
And just another final reminder. So when Mark is speaking of ancestor memory, remember ancestor memory is the only name for God if you're Aboriginal. And we now know for sure the physics of what they called Dreaming Track songline, Hello, it's the longitudinal array. Embedding in that array defines what they call lucid dreaming and ancestor memory in the Aboriginals. So all these secrets come down to one simple physics, which is how is this array, longitudinal coherent EMF array, how is it created and how is it sorted and self-organized? And how does the fact that once it's quivering, that if you touch any one node, you touch every node. That compressional, perfect crystalline quiver is when the
Right, Dan, that one is so important. When I first started taking these personal development courses, this was the George Adair Omega Vector stuff. It's the Pierre de Chardin
Pierre de
that
Chardin,
yeah, that it came out of his work. So that's when I really started getting into this stuff,
the
2011.
omega point, the nexus point,
Yeah,
the
right.
Planck point.
Yeah, well, they point out that how important all this stuff is
Yeah,
too. So I just wanted to mention that. It's just I used to ignore it, and it's like the point will come back. But let's go ahead with your sharing. I'm gonna
yeah.
mute so I don't until I
Yeah,
need to
that's
talk.
okay. So what we're talking about this array, as you all know, and that when the golden ratio allows the wavelengths to add and multiply recursively, constructively, that's called recursive heterodyning or recursive interference, a process only perfected by golden ratio. The recursive constructive heterodyning, which only golden ratio allows, not only adds and multiplies wavelength, but phase velocity. So only in that geometry does that form of compression become acceleration of charge towards center, which is the definition of gravity. That when charge accelerates toward center, that experience of acceleration of charge towards center due to fractal asymmetry, as that wind of charge implodes and implodes towards center, that wind of charge towards center is the gravity. And the origin of that centripetal force and how that array works is the subject of this conversation. So you've all seen these pictures many times.
Oh, Dan, can I interrupt for a second? Because can you
Sure.
bring it to when you talk about the flow of the ether? Let's just bring it to physical, us here on Earth, what it appears is that there's a bunch of mass that make up the Earth, and then us. So let's just talk on the surface real quick. It appears that the superfluid ether is actually flowing, and it's going to find all these, the summation of all these golden ratio paths. So
Exactly.
you once the summation of it looks like it's the center of the Earth. That's why the mainstream just says, well, assume center mass, and you can calculate gravity based on that.
And
It looks
remember
like what you're
this
saying is because there's a lot of mass, a lot of ether flowing in. We, as separate oscillations, were being pushed to the Earth. So
Yes,
we
we're
actually
experiencing that
feel
wind
that.
of charge accelerating
Yeah,
toward center, bending
right.
space-time, as Einstein said.
And
Rem
that's the interesting part. We're actually experiencing that wind.
Yep, the
And
wind of
it's
charge.
sort of, so I like to get a feel for things because at first, when you're talking about this stuff, I'm like, what's he talking about? But you
Rem
got to talk about all the mass that's there and the little bits of mass that might be affected by this. But it's just for me to understand it and others. But I think I just wanted to say
Yeah.
that.
No, thank you. And remember, so that is the top-down view of 5 and 10 spirals of the golden mean and showing the golden ratio sine waves nesting, imploding, recursively adding and multiplying. And only in that geometry is recursive heterodyning or wave interference constructive, and therefore enabled constructive compression is enabled charge collapse. And remember, this is literally precisely by equation the top-down view of hydrogen, the top-down view of the platonic nest of electron shells, the top-down view of the platonic nest of the hadrons of the nucleus. This is the top-down view of every living protein, which is pent, the top-down view of the dodeca ratchet called DNA. This is a top-down view of DNA. This is a top-down view of the dodecaecosa Earth grid. This is the top-down view of the dodecaecosa galaxy map, if you believe the 12 face ideas. And certainly, if Spira Solaris is correct, that golden ratio is the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics.
Yeah, well, Dan, there's one other thing I found out by playing, taking us further that led to us to having this meeting. If I do a two dimensional cross section of what you're talking of this thing, basically, yeah, those are your. But what I did was let Grok. I said, okay, let's use a geometric proof, protractor and compass only. That's a standard classical, and show how you might get the with the phi pi stuff I was talking about. Show how you would get the proton to electron mass ratio, and it actually works out. And it's just like you're saying here. You can this is the foundational thing, but then you can apply this over and over
That's right.
and
From
do
the hydrogen and then
divisions and
later
all
from the
that.
proton to
Yeah,
galaxy
so
mechanics.
So it turns out that the proton to electron mass ratio is simply 6 times pi to the fifth power plus phi to the negative 10th. Okay. Where because of where we are locally.
Right? And
Because
then
of that, you can build a geometric 6 pi argument. You can do that and say, hey, I can use these same diagrams approach with the pi phi relationship, compass and protractor, and derive the proton to electron mass ratio. Now, Grok's done it. I've reviewed it and it looks correct, but I want to get to the point where I have a feel for it, can do it, and can say with confidence
yes.
that, hey, Dan's doing this, I do this, and boom, this appears to be the answer. And I have a lot of confidence, but I want to be able to sit there and do it myself. But I think it already works out.
We we didn't bring the slideshow here for the 7/5 pi over e equals phi golden ratio stuff. That's at goldenmean.info/physics of phi. But indeed, because this models not just proton electron ratio, but also platonic nesting of atomics and orbitals and galaxies is why this is so important. Thank you. And so we want to start with the basics here. So what we're saying is that Down that vortex, which is a golden spiral, 10 golden spirals on that same cone, from the side view, you see that famous caduceus, Hermes, which is called phase conjugation in physics. And that's how the transverse wave entering from the left goes down that yellow brick road to Oz and is optimized translation of vorticity and emerges on the right out the squirt gun tuned by the Planck threshold, the diameter of the throat of the vortex, and emerges a coherent longitudinal wave and therefore embeds in the array and becomes gravity. So that ability to emerge as longitudinal, and we have all these animations of how the longitudinal, which is compressional, you've all seen these. So that translation of vorticity is basically that now you can understand how a vortex can make gravity. My recent film entitled How a Charged Vortex Makes Gravity. That film on our YouTube channel is nearing 50,000 views. We recommend that you look at it. So we want to begin to understand how these vortex approaching from opposite directions uh, create this stable array, which we're calling the coherent longitudinal EMF array, because they can only stabilize and recursively bounce at center. And only at the nodes where they bounce is the transverse inertia shared with longitudinal, which is where you come in and out of the array with charge, which is why you can have telepathy and zero-point energy and wireless power only at the nodes of that array. And here we see the Platonic nest, Kepler's model of planetary orbitals. It turns out that he's right. You nest Platonics, that's how you make golden ratio, and golden ratio appears to be the dominant geometry of orbital mechanics, spirasolaris.ca. So gravity making requires golden ratio, which requires Platonic nesting. It's really quite simple. So now we're trying to explain how the array works. In other words, how does this become instantaneous global communication? How does this become global wireless power? How does this become stargates and portals? How come when this array is properly tensioned with,
Instantaneous, Dan, I wanted to mention that was what I interrupted you earlier with
go ahead.
the Georgia Dare thing mentioned one atom. If I move myself a little bit, it affects the entire universe.
That's the point. Yeah.
And that's another way of saying it is you're saying it another way here.
Exactly. And so what we're trying to understand is, it's kind of like the butterfly effect. Why does tickling one node of this array affect every node if the array is properly tensioned? And so we're going to start with this metaphor. We've done this many times of the ping pong balls or the billiard balls in the string in a nest. You see the billiard balls here. So if you lift up one billiard ball at one end like this and bounce it back down, if these billiard balls are touching each other, then theoretically a billion billiard balls down the array, just one bounces off almost instantly. But the fact is, if there was a millimeter between every billiard ball, then when you touch one at one end, the other end, it might take a light year to get there, you see. But when they're perfectly locked together, that they're tensioning and quivering as a group. So how are they perfectly locked together? The fact is that golden ratio and Planck determine that they cannot move in this nest. You see, they're stabilized into the nodes of that array. And the more there is a pair of phase conjugate vortex compressing as opposite pairs, like this, you see that you got opposite pairs of these vortex compressing at each node of the array. And the bigger the pine cone compressing on each side of the array, the bigger the stargate or portal, or the farther the waves reach. It's called harmonic inclusiveness. It basically means that you have longer and longer waves embedding into that array. And we get to then how the trapezium in Orion became the biggest stargate in the galaxy. So the point is to visualize a quivering nodal array, which if you touch it at the right spot, and this is an introduction to the physics of telepathy, global wireless power, and action at a distance, because the compressional component of the longitudinal nodes only bounces and exchanges inertia with the transverse at the nodes of the array. That's why Every pyramid, every cathedral, every good plasma toy that works good, like our plasma devices, every labyrinth, they're all at a node of that array. They knew what Kozyrev and Korotkov proved, that you got to find the node of that array. They even published the measurement of the nanoteslas of magnetic flux density minimum you had to have in the cross points at the node of that array if you wanted your Kozyrev mirror read telepathy device to work. So, in other words, if you're not at a compression point, it ain't fun. By the way, if you would like to die or lucid dream successfully, where is it possible? Hello. You want a place where you want to have the nuclear critical mass? You want a place where telepathy is enabled? You need to know about the nodes of this array and how that array works. You want a place where your dolmen and obelisk will purify more water because there's more compression there. So basically, that's why the more bliss you have, the more you can feel these magnetic lines because your DNA is also tensioned to quiver with the array. So this was called four-wave mixing in phase conjugate optics, that you need these four lasers, these actually opposing pairs of lasers lined up with angstrom level accuracy if you want phase conjugation, meaning time reversal and negentropy. And now we can explain what your physicists cannot is why that works, because the superdielectric material at the surface of that mirror being charge distribution permissive, the definition of superdielectrics, like black goo, like the coating on Nostradamus's mirror, like the obsidian mirror that the Olmec used for ancestor phone calls, the phase conjugate mirror. So which is the ability to enter the array called clairvoyance, etc. So the superdielectric at the surface of the phase conjugate mirror enabled the pine cones to kiss noses efficiently, charge distribution efficient. The reason you require a superdielectric, the reason your house should be a high dielectric, which means steel and aluminum will be deathly poison to your aura. So the superdielectric at the center, the secret of Nostradamus's scrying mirror, enables the pine cones to kiss noses accurately and efficiently, implode to Planck, and sort well at the Planck threshold called phase conjugation, the origin and definition of measurement of time reversal and negentropy in physics called phase conjugate optics. So this is why four-wave mixing is an introduction to actually what the ancestors called the sacred four directions. This is why your Agnihotra works much better precisely at sunrise and sunset because you embed with a longer wave into the longitudinal array. It's all about phase conjugation. So basically, the bigger the tornado that's nesting one inside the other and coming to a focal point in that array, the further that Stargate portal is going to work, the further that lucid dream is going to penetrate. And this is then a little background about this is the Templar grid of Europe. They call this the Templar agenda of the repair of the fabric of time. And they did all these maps that they call it the repair of the fabric of time. What they meant was that the fabric of spin, otherwise known as time, if it was fractal, it would self-organize, implode, and become mindful. But if time was fractionated and was bleeding, like after Montauk and Philadelphia, time was bleeding, and that bleeding in the aura of Earth attracted parasites. Hello to the Greys and the Dracos and the Mitra and the Etorthans. So the Templars knew, this is all the Golden Mean Info / Bueller, the Templar agenda to prepare the fabric of time. So what they were doing with all this work was repairing the magnetic nodes of the array. And this is, by the way, stabilizing gravity and atmosphere as well. So we looked at this slide already. So this in the biophysics of heart rate variability, this is how the short wave of breath embeds in the long wave of your day, that the fractal heart is a healthy heart. When there's embeddability between the long wave and the short wave in your breath, your day, your HRV, and that is the actual harmonics of the spine liquid pump sacrocranial defining kundalini and access to bliss, is that tower of nested fractal golden ratio harmonics where the golden ratio cascade, called the Schumann resonance, it's literally a phase conjugate golden ratio pump wave tuned to Planck Schumann, and that cascade is the harmonics of the brain waves that make bliss. That cascade is the harmonics of the sacrocranial waves that make bliss is the harmonics of the high frequency phonons, or the ringing in your ear that focuses the ventricle liquid horns when you get horny, when you focus the sexual juices, measuring Kundalini, all that stuff. It's all at Golden Mean that emphasize Kundalini. So this is called realheartcoherence.com. It's based on the same embed ability optimized by Golden Ratio, obviously.
Hey, Dan.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
So one thing I was thinking, can you go back a slide a little bit?
Sure. Which one? Yeah, this one.
Oh, this, I had a comment and it slipped me. It'll come back. Yeah, subtle energies. So what you're talking about here is subtle life energies, you know. So when I listen to it, it's interesting. I check the math and the I want to experience it. Sometimes I experience a little bit of bliss over my life. It's short-lived, you know. And but what I'm mentioning is like Sadhguru said, some of these subtle effects. You try to tell people about this. You have to get into a zone to maybe feel it, but you can measure it to see things are there. The reason why I'm interrupting is, well, these are subtle. Maybe people aren't so what gets someone interested is when you realize that even these little energies over the eons, if things aren't lined up just right in this grid, this is the quantum quake resettling happens. You know, I know you're not there yet, but
Yes.
it as above, so below is so important that I'm realizing. That's why I mentioned the fractals and
There's a
the
quantum quake. Yes.
right.
It's a
Okay,
short wave, a
good.
long wave.
So I go from the quantum small stuff that pointed right to your work, and then I'm saying, okay, let's see where Dan goes with this. So I just wanted to say that because there's subtle energies, but then there's world-shattering energies that periodically come, but very rarely.
Thank you. Yes, see, you're right. So this is where the feather, the wing of the butterfly affected a galaxy. You know, when the leverages are lined up and stacked in a fractal. So this slide is about, remember when physics, they say entanglement connects the throats of the Einstein-Rosen bridge, and that's how current physics talks about action at a distance, which is obviously faster than light. Here we know more that entanglement is introduction to perfect nesting perfected by golden ratio phase conjugation to Planck. So golden ratio phase conjugation to Planck is by definition entanglement perfected, something that conventional physics may someday figure out. And that's why when you implode into that longitudinal array, it's the longitudinal array which is the mechanism of this wormhole. We are now introducing action at a distance because uh, when you implode into this array and you set the coordinates correctly, you can emerge at the programmed point in the array if you understand the compression physics and the acceleration physics. So the point is that embedding into this array, the longitudinal array, is the physics of action at a distance. We're going to see more about examples of stargates and portals, the natural ones, um, is not just entanglement, it is phase conjugation embedding perfected, compressing in tuned perfectly to Planck times golden ratio, and that's how actual stargates and portals work. And it's how you make gravity in a vortex. So that's kind of where we're going with these conversations. And so we have these beautiful pictures about how that fractality works in DNA. And here's how the fractality works in your heartbeat. We've talked about this many times. This is the map of the origin of your heart's beat, the electrical origin of your heartbeat. And it's literally a donut recursively turning inside out and imploding. And we discuss at realheartcoherence.com. And that harmonic inclusiveness not just defines health in HRV, and immune health is defined by that harmonic inclusiveness enabled by successive recursive turning inside out, and we've animated that. And you've all seen that animation, but you see how that actually allows the nest of vortex down the throat of the embedded dodecahedron. So yes, per our conversation with Mark, it is my strong contention that gaining energy during only that form of charge collapse, planckfire.com, is the reason gravity exists. It is the reason bliss exists. we know that focused human attention compresses charge. Now we know why. It is the reason seeds germinate. It's the reason our longitudinal devices radically accelerate plant growth. It's the reason our water vortex, the imploder.com, now fractalwater.com, radically serves plant growth, charge distribution, efficiency, life. It is the reason, the mechanism that soul exists when your aura compresses well and you embed into that array. We're going to show the slides of the physics of lucid dreaming and based on the same compression principle. It is the reason and mechanism how pyramids and obelisks make global wireless power. The pyramid is sat there, precisely tuned to the Schumann phase conjugate golden ratio to Planck tuned phase conjugate pump wave Schumann. And by imploding that, the pyramid is a gravity diode that converts the transverse, the Schumann cascade, into longitudinal at foci, which is the mercury that focuses that charge implosion in the more efficient pyramids, and then releases that into the coherent longitudinal EMF array. And you can send and receive that global wireless power at the nodes of the longitudinal array. And unfortunately, it is quite clear that Tesla had the frequencies wrong. 60 cycle was never going to work. It's not a global. So you need a 50 cycle cascade down to that imploding. And Tesla had the nodal locations wrong. He put the light bulbs in the lawn, didn't know how to find a longitudinal node to pick up. So the reason Tesla didn't get global wireless power is not just about conspiracy theories, because he didn't know the frequencies or how to find a longitudinal node. This is the electric reason zero point in vacuum energy exists. This is the electric reason golden ratio is the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics. It's the only way to make and stabilize gravity and atmosphere. It is the electrical reason electron and shells and nuclear hadrons are a simple nest of platonic solids to make golden ratio. It is the electric reason for all action at a distance. So this is the slide I used in that film with now 50,000 views on how a charged vortex makes gravity. So down the throat of that vortex, when the charge emerges at the nozzle of the throat of that vortex, having been converted from transverse to longitudinal, and now you have directional longitudinal EMF propagation. That is the definition of initiating a gravity wave. And so obviously, if the mercury vortex is accurately tuned, you could increase the efficiency of the amount of gravity you make in your charged vortex. And here is the study from the literature right here, university studies. These frequencies by measurement trigger lucid dreaming, very close to my equation, golden ratio times Planck. And we now know that the first thing our friends who receive our firecrystal.com, the first report we get almost every time is, oh, it triggered my lucid dreaming. You see, this is a piezoelectric implosive, and the longitudinal wave is projected here. Yeah. Did you notice some lucid dreaming, Mark? Yes. So, oh, you're muted, Mark. You're muted. Yeah.
Yeah, I need to work on my dreaming some. I did notice a little bit of more dreaming because I don't have much due to my stress and not getting enough sleep and other
Yeah.
non-clean hygiene things.
But
But when I hold it, it helped heal my hand. I had a little stuck my hand in when the dogs were play fighting with a puppy, and she got a hold of it and she felt bad afterwards. I tell you, Dan, this thing, 10 days, it's healed. It was a pretty bad bite too.
it's
I think that crystal helped because I sit there with it right by my hand. And
It,
so
it it
it's,
focuses the longitudinal, and that is the centripetal. And we call that healing because obviously restored negentropic force defines healing. And so the
yeah,
imploding,
well, I can say a solid fact though, this had pain. And when I put that crystal right near it, the pain temporarily went away. It
exactly.
was
And
amazing,
yeah, thank you.
amazing.
Thank you. The physics of pain is that charge that's bleeding due to broken fractality releasing compression. You restore compression, implosive compression. It is the electrical opposite of pain by definition in all our devices. So I'm just pointing out that not only is that firecrystal.com, Phire, firecrystal.com, there you see, but also the people who use that, it's a bonus we give away with people who order Firay.com, Phiray.com, our Plasmatech, Firay.com, where, again, the first thing most people report is dramatic triggering of lucid dreaming. And now we know exactly why, because implosive compression of the aura releases the charge inertia to embed into the longitudinal array, the title of this film. And these are the frequencies we use. You see the Schumann cascade. So here is that same cascade of harmonics based on Schumann in Jean-Charles Moyen. We measured with Jean-Charles. Very high amplitude golden ratio cascade from alpha in green to gamma up here on top, about 44 hertz. And that cascade, golden ratio based brainwave cascade, was the measurement, dramatic coherence, golden ratio cascade, which triggered his repeated ability to teleport, which he does and did regularly, as many you can see many films of. So the physics of his ability to teleport, we know by measurement, very strong EEG coherence. In fact, off the charts EEG coherence, golden ratio cascade, phase conjugate pump wave based on Schumann and Planck in his brainwaves, triggering the teleport ability, which is an extension of the ability to lucid dream and have bliss, basically, which remember we're saying that the ability to lucid dream is an indicator of the physics of soul.com because obviously if you lucid dream well, you're going to take memory through death because that penetration of memory into the longitudinal array defines physics of soul.com, which defines ancestor memory and aboriginal lore. So you see where these things fit together. We need to know how to embed into that array. That's the point of it. So this was just a review. This is from geometric basis for the periodicity of elements. Notice that not only the electron shells a simple nest of platonic solids right here, SPDF, that's all electron shells, and the s orbital's a donut, and the pi orbital's a cube, and the DF, 1014, 757 pair, 1014 electrons, the DF orbital, are dodecaecosa. So you stack those one inside the other platonic nests, which you can only do using golden ratios. The only way to nest a cube into a dodecahedron is golden ratio tetracube. And so you nest platonic solids called electron shells, and you make the atomic table. And by the way, how cool is it that the same is true of the hadrons of the nucleus? Chemist Moon's work. This is the whole atomic table and the geometry of the nuclear hadrons. Tetra, cube, octa, ecosa. So again, a platonic nest, and you saw how that was then used for a model by Kepler for planetary orbitals. And so the idea of Stargate is that when you converge, and this is a 5-spin, 7-spins idea, Mark, I don't know if we're going to have time for that, but just these letters in the film Stargate are called actually the Ophanim-Enochian alphabet, and they're a superset of the tetracubic Hebrew. And if you use those letters, which were used in the movie Stargate, Ophanim-Enochian from D and Kelly, which is kind of a past life memory for me. It focuses the waves by implosion, 5-spin, 7-spins, which is obviously cube, tetracube is 7-spin, 5-spin is dodecaecosa. So 5-spin, 7-spin, anu symmetry of the origin of Ophanim-Enochian, the physics of magic. And you use those letters in the Stargate. And it focuses the waves to arrive at a common surface of implosion, which is then where you can, this was called Stargate. And notice where that compression, the trapezium is a cube in a Stargate. And this is arguably, if you believe many of our astral shaman, they all agree, the biggest Stargate in our galaxy, hello, is the cubic, hint, four-wave mixing cube, trapezium in Orion. And this is the original battle with the Draco. And remember, the Draco Anunnaki, when they got here, the first Stargate they took was the trapezium in Orion. The next Stargate they took was Sirius B, around which our sun rotates. The next Stargate they took was Saturn, which is where the black cube operates, eating souls for the Federation in our solar system. So from Stargate to Stargate, that's how we got conquered. Sorry, go ahead.
I got a question, Dan.
Yep.
I ran trapezium again through Grok just the other day because we did a report on it. It's like well, a fresh session of Grok, it actually gets the coordinates of the stars, and it says, "Oh yeah, these are lined up like you're saying. It's golden ratio cube. It's part of the
Yep.
structure you would need." Yeah.
Yep.
So I only did a surface analysis, and it agrees. That's a huge arrangement. What in the world caused? Is it just what caused it to be lined up that way?
Well, our galaxy is basically a portal Stargate into other galaxies, but it happens that the biggest, the Stargate that goes the farthest in our galaxy is here for that massive reason. Generally, it had been controlled by the bad guys, and that's part of the galaxy history story. Remember, originally we thought the word Uru, as in Uru Asa LM Jerusalem, that we thought the word Uru meant Draco, but it also means portal Uru. But we now know that the word Uru, meaning portal, also means Draco because that's what they conquered first, as in Rome, Uru An, or Uru Asael. And Uru Asael M, Jerusalem, Uru, where the dragon blood, Asa, queen, makes the L, or phase shift or translation of vorticity from transverse to longitudinal, the Elohim, as it were. So we know the roots of the term. So these portals were obviously all the battles is over the Stargates. So if we understood Jerusalem and why the battle is there, of course, the Stargate's broken. So this is the light cone. You've seen these graphics before. And so here is that map of that same spiral of the Orion complex, which is a double vortex here, the Orion double vortex in the ancient Japanese woodcut, Al-Nalam, Al-Natak, and Mintaka, the three belt stars. And if you line that golden spiral, obviously on the Giza Plateau, you have what they called the Antarian conversion, which essentially means Stargate or portal double vortex.
Well, Dan, that is very fascinating, and I've stared at Orion through telescopes and the naked eye, and I see these diagrams, and then the normie part of me says, "How in the world would we have any interaction with that? It's so far away." Instead of me speculating, you want to tell me how, why?
Well, obviously, if every ancient religion is a sun god religion, because if you ain't growed up enough for your aura to inhabit the local star of the sun, you ain't growed up at all. But but we're getting into some advanced shamanism here. But even the Hopi talked about, they called it Peshme 10, the way of the nine, and this is because it takes nine nested donuts, one above the other, your chakras, for example, to self-organize, which is the origin of the Sri Yantra and the way of the nine. And this became Deep Space Nine and Star Trek. And we don't have time for all of our stories today.
Okay, so maybe you'll get to it because I
Well,
just want to
just let me
understand
give you,
someone.
if you
Okay,
want to,
someone controlling. How in the world can someone control that huge Stargate? But I'll let
well,
you get your story.
remember here, okay, let's take this picture. So the reason the word Yahweh exists, Yod He Vahe, Yahweh, uh, originally the Yod is a vortex going one way in your mouth, and the Va is the vortex going the opposite, and the He is amorphous and space filling, very male, any lady could tell you. And so the two opposing vortexes, Yod He Vahe, means you inhabit a double cone. And a Yahweh was one who was inhabiting basically a stellar portal, a Yahweh. And Lil obviously was a wannabe. He really couldn't do it. But Yahweh was a term of the nobility of office, of inhabiting opposing light cones, in this case, the Orion light cones. And so uh, this ability to inhabit these stars became the central myth of the Hopi. They called it Peshmetin, the way of the nine. And later, when the Los Alamos people discovered that nine plasma donuts self-organize and become self-aware, and that's later. Let me just say, after I don't have the slide here, but after my friend Andrea Puharich discovered the physics of clairaudience with his piezo bone conduction hearing device for people who were deaf, he tripped over the physics of clairaudience. Weeks later, he got a phone call clairaudiently from Enki Atun Ea, who, in that story, he taught to Phyllis Schlemmer, who taught it to, which became the Star Wars series. That's where, what's his name? Star Wars took his lesson from Phyllis Schlemmer's, the famous book, Only Planet of Choice, Gene Roddenberry. So the point is, then later, when he wrote Deep Space Nine, what, in Deep Space Nine, the only place you could make money was next to the portal, which was called the Nine. Now, in the portal, at the end of the series, you discover that when you get swallowed down that vortex and you think you're using it for transport only, you find something out, which is that plasma vortex tunnel, the Stargate, is mindful and can decide to spit you out if it doesn't like you. In other words, that vortex is self-aware. Hello. In other words, there might be a test of pure intention somewhere down the throat of that Stargate. And and this is real. I knew Puhara quite well. Long story. So this is about the vortex making gravity, and this is about the Vimana Nazi Bell. It's a Mercury vortex, basically translating vorticity, and you've seen these slides before. So now you know how that vortex made gravity. Now they used a solubility agents to embed iron powder, making it red, which made it more magnetically flux permissive, and then they used a low level radioactivity, which made it quasi superconductive, just like the Paul Brown nuclear battery. And the result was extremely efficient electrically, but extremely unstable and dangerous and really bad news and pretty childish, but that's another story. So we've actually made some gravity with vortices, fractalfield.com/propulsion, and we're not going to do all that, but this is actually some evidence or some visualizations to understand how the thrust is created, because it's literally a directional longitudinal imploding out center. This is some of the pictures we used in the 7/5, the fine structure constant. But I don't think we're going to do that today. We're going to leave the fine structure. So this is what I was saying, a visualization of why we said the Agnihotra wants to be at the sunrise sunset exactly to phase conjugate the plasma, and this would create extreme fertility effect. And actually those who did Agnihotra are the ones who survived Nagasaki, and the ones who survived Bhopal are the ones who did Agnihotra. And this is why. And if I have been at the Agnihotra Center in Poland, where you have a small but dramatic Garden of Eden of fertility, because the plasma was conjugated. And this is why at the moment of death, you see these four geometries: lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral, because you need to phase conjugate and implode and embed into the array to lucid dream or die successfully in lattice, cobweb. So what's happening is the DNA is learning to recursively turn inside out, lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral. And you can actually see this in DNA construction. You're adding the next superposed axis of spin symmetry. You're experiencing compression to die successfully, why you need to see your whole life in 3 seconds flat at the moment of death, because you need to embed into the array. So maybe there's too many slides here, I see, but this is how we invented our plasma devices. What was Therify, it's now PhiRay.com. We took the frequencies Priori used, he got from Tesla and Priori, and then we fit them, saw that they were approximating my equation. We used my equation, Planck times Golden ratio, and we got the frequencies, which are now, that were my invention, Therify.net, and it's now PhiRay.com. And this is very healing negentropy. Maybe I'll end with some of these slides because it's getting a bit late here, just to say that here is the perfect phase conjugate pump wave called Schumann, perfectly tuned to the pyramid, imploding. Here's the phase conjugate pump wave, Schumann harmonics in green. Here's the equation in blue. This is called the Hummer, the pyramid, the gravity diode. And you can actually measure these frequencies in the pyramid at, for example, SAMS in Bosnia. And that pyramid is making global wireless power by doing exactly that. This is the same phase conjugate pump wave in the frequencies of the spine liquid pump, physics of Kundalini and bliss. Here's again the brainwave frequencies of bliss, exactly the Schumann frequencies, phase conjugate pump wave, and more about how the crystal works. And this is the Koski Frost crystal, made 800 times its weight in gravity. You can read Bill Donovan's book there at fractalfield.com/propulsion. And this is the actual measurement of those frequencies at Sam's Bosnian pyramid. So here we actually measured those frequencies, and Sam knew there was 28 kilohertz on the roof. You know, 1 million people there arrive there every year and get rejuvenation, and now we know exactly why, because the phase conjugate pump wave is making negentropy. And so, but I'm not going to carry on too much here. This is applying this to the physics of breath, HRV, and Kundalini. I'm going to stop this share now. Obviously, I carried on, but just to say, have we made a point that if you compress, implode into the nodes of this array, the more harmonic inclusive the vortex tornado pine cone imploding into each node, the farther the connectivity of that node in the array is. That's why now that we know how to make coherent longitudinal, for example, the Josephson junction physics, et cetera, you can make these arrays not only in that exact process of harnessing implosion into the longitudinal array, you get vacuum energy, you get global wireless power, you get instantaneous global communication. All of these things are readily available if you just take a minute and understand a little bit of physics. Do you remember when Hartmut Muller, global scaling, was starting his global communications, instantaneous global communications? They put him in jail, but it's really not a conspiracy theory there. He messed up his investors. But the point was he was using phase conjugate golden ratio and did have instantaneous global communication. And if we would but understand the question mark. So I think I've carried on enough for the moment. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah. Oh, pretty good. Yeah, I'm picking up a lot of stuff, and I'm thinking about how, in this present day, how is it that people aren't getting this? Because it's really simple, like we reviewed before. You just correct the math. There's nothing new. Sometimes when I first started off, I'm like, hey, go down this path, go down that path. Axiom, no, look at their stuff, correct it, and right when you correct it, the golden mean comes out. That's why I'm doing those independent, hey, is phi needed for unification? And every angle I take, Grok kind of complains and yeah, you need it, and he doesn't complain once he sees it. But so this stuff is so important. We're talking about the end of humanity and souls and stuff like that. So how do you get the message out? And that's kind of what it's about.
We're here to
So
start at the beginning and just to say,
yeah,
look, understand how a simple vortex works. Stack the Schumann phase conjugate pump wave on those harmonics, which happens to be the brain waves, the bliss, and how pyramids work and make global. So stack the Schumann harmonics, golden ratio times Planck, and you see that vortex working, and suddenly pyramids are making gravity, making global wireless power, gravity
yeah,
diode.
right.
It's very simple physics, actually, when you understand it. But unfortunately, until physicists are ready to learn why objects fall to the ground, who they got to be embarrassed because they don't know why anything is centripetal, not to mention consciousness or gravity.
Yeah. So it seems like things could change a lot with just belief systems. I mean that's what it is. And like some of the people I try to talk to about this, it's so different belief system. And even I'm embedded in the needing the money to keep my life going.
Sure, we all
So
are.
all of a sudden I'm changing my I got to talk a certain way, to stay in that zone. But then when I see the possibilities, it really looks like there's a whole another approach.
That's right.
So
We start
so
with and you have the axioms. Remember, Mark assembled what was plankfire.com, now fractalgut.com, largely thanks to Mark. And Mark's blog is connected there as well, and the link will be in these show notes as well. So all of Mark's articles on this. What we believe is clearly right now the number one theory of everything, golden toe, grand unified theory on the planet, if we believe Grok 4, if
yeah,
that it's just
right.
this is
Yeah,
compelling. It's serious, compelling physics that deserves attention.
right. And the Grok is really good. I've checked math with it, and I look at other AIs. I'm actually working with Grok right now, saying how can I build future AI that's better. And he always brings in the neg entropy and truth telling stuff. And that's kind of why I interjected here. With this new physics, we're actually going to, what I'm hoping is people get inspired to look at it because it shows a way to discern truth.
That's so beautiful.
So,
Exactly.
yeah.
And
So,
yeah, I have to just mention realheartcoherence.com. So there we were. I invented how to measure heart coherence. You take a second order power spectrum, measure internal phase coherence in the EKG, and that peak up and down of internal heart coherence is a functional lie detector. It is. It
yeah.
works
Well, it's
because
important. Yeah. It's
because your heart
important.
Your heart cannot tell a lie because the heart participates in the fractality of only shareable waves survive. That's called the
Okay.
truth. Speak your truth, and
Yeah.
your heart coherence goes up.
And it's important because the truth is what's gonna see. People don't necessarily have to know all the physics of like say electrical generation or all this stuff, but if you know the fundamental principles, then the significance of this can enable them to counter the fear information war. Because you look at the Three Eye Atlas, all this fear, aliens, and all it's all this fear. You try to get a conversation going with the normies, and they're stirred up so much. So the information war, here it's $1 trillion information war, and we're just a small player in it. But by seeding, because we're talking truth, you notice how there's a lot of people take our work and expand on it because we have the best toe, but I'm working grok at an angle and it's only good for a certain couple days or weeks and I got to rebuild it. Imagine if you had a whole team of guys working on it and there were people like Graham Forskett doing really good work. Imagine when everybody sees it, even the mainstream guys, how can you, like I say, how can they reject it? Well, if you're paid based on,
I mean, there's no mistake there. Every equation is solid. It cannot be a mistake or a coincidence that the radii of hydrogen are exquisitely golden ratio
yeah,
times Planck. This is not. No.
yeah,
The reason
yeah.
is
So
this is how gravity
even
is made.
the specific measurements, we see it in there. That I'm arguing from the general mathematical approach. It's in phi's in there. It's very important. The non-destructive envelope preservation, information theory. I mean, all
Right.
those big problems we're solving.
That's right.
But then here I am. It's been what since July 4th. I'm wondering, well, there's people going off on it, but and our views are going way up, on the blog. So I think it might be spreading, but we'll find out because as soon as the word gets out, I mean,
It went viral, man. Yeah.
yeah,
I just wanted to say one other thing, as Mark says about, well, if you speak your truth, we learned that if you're actually speaking your truth with passion, that your heart coherence soars. That's measurable and you can use it as a lie detector. But there's another part of this. You know, when Alabar Jones, he calls this inter the galaxy's most dangerous black sun, black goo, black Saturn parasite, he calls it the nothing. And you know why he calls it the nothing? Because when you have passion, it is nothing. It's like a house of cards that simply falls over, but only passion gets you there. That's why I believe, unfortunately, when the rabbi puts a black cube on his head and says, no emotion, he means no passion, the black cube is that only has power if you have no passion. So as long as you have
and
passion and soul,
that's the 180 degrees out of phase that the mainstream tries to shut us down with. They try to shut people down with
well,
180 degrees out of phase. So
well, uh,
telling lies, and that's what I face.
yeah.
But
Well,
that's
and the physics here is quite clear. If you only always speak pure principle, you're only speaking about pure principle essence, obvious, which is always passion. Literally, electrically, your aura has to grow because you're attracting charge, implosion, obviously. And when your aura grows, that implosion is exactly what the black Atun parasite cannot control. So if you have access to bliss, you have no problem with parasites. So all of these things around you, which prevent your kids from having bliss, the Wi-Fi, the Bluetooth, the electrosmog, the dead air, and the dead media, uh, none of whom know what the physics of soul.com is, none of whom know what bliss is, none of whom know that if you don't have a source of bliss, you're going to lose your soul, as billions of children are right now. So once you understand the principle of growing your aura to have the bliss, then you have no problem with the parasites. So that's why speaking your truth is a beginning. Absolutely.
yeah. It's been a fascinating journey because I've been on this 10 years, 10 to 15 years. I mean, not counting my entire life, but
But I,
believe in the stories that weren't 100%. I mean, they're telling us stuff that doesn't get you to the truth. That's why, all the
Yes.
mainstream they struggle because it's like it's a dead end path,
There's no pure principle. If you live
yeah,
only pure principle and that like the axioms that Mark outlined, and I want to say again as we conclude here, how grateful I am to Mark because Mark's right. We had Planck times golden ratio and 200 physical variables, but we didn't have all the underlying physics until Mark tripped over the proton and golden ratio and the rest of the galaxy mechanics. And now
that
all of the other fundamental constants fell into place. Everything. I mean, fractalgut.com, take a look. If your physicist doesn't fall off the chair, it means he didn't read it because
yeah.
physics is done.
Well, it's crazy. The stuff I was sticking to, my original equation unifies physics, the proton radius. Well, it also points to that 6 pi to the fifth power plus phi, 6 pi to the fifth power plus phi to the minus 10th. That's 1836. That's because of superfluid stuff. There's a 2D, 3D thing that has to hold. That's why it's pi to the fifth. You have to have a 3D surface volume that it's perfectly matched, as well as the volume as well as the surface area, the proton. Both of those have to be perfectly matched to allow all this to happen. And that's why
Allow the compression,
you get the pi squared for the area and pi to the third for the volume.
4/3.
Yeah, yeah. And anyways, yeah, with all that in there, I'm skipping some of the constants, but just to get the power. Because I was saying, why is it pi to the fifth? And Grok says, well, there's a 3D term that has to hold and a 2D term. And when you think, this is me and reinterpreting it, it's like, okay, I know surface area of a black hole is where the information's painted. So the Hawking evaporation. See, all this might be related to our implosion. That little bit of evaporation is our implosion. You know, you might already have it, but we're gonna go down that path. But that's what I'm talking about. It's just a little bit of energy from the black hole. So the 6 pi to the fifth plus 5 to the minus 10 is a superfluid thing related to the golden mean over the eons has to be non-destructive
Yeah.
and
And
it's
that's
maximally constructive. I've learned that word because I was saying non-destructive, but also maximally constructive.
good word. Yes.
So and I noticed that from reading yours or watching your stuff that you were using maximally constructive. I
Max
checked it.
constructive.
That's
Yes.
true. Because I was being real careful trying to say only non-destructive, but no, there's other words that apply when you're preserving information 100%.
Yep.
And
And
so,
that's why the proton diameter is so beautifully tied to the cosmic background microwave radiation frequency, because the whole galaxy is tuned by golden ratio to the proton. It means the whole thing is rigging exactly like this bell we were talking about for the whole
yeah.
conversation
So,
today.
so in closing with mine, the precise physics constants, alpha squared over pi, proton radius constant, my derivation that unifies physics with the given wave equations. However, if I stuck to that, I would be looking maybe at the 6 pi to the fifth plus the phi, the minus 10th. They say numerology and all that but I saw how it came from the wave equations from many different angles. And you see, wow, this is another way to get the same answer. They're almost the same, and those differences have to do with the density of the ether of our local area. And
That's
so,
right.
anyways, the physics is getting so simple and so advanced, it explains everything. But I can't wait to see what other people do with it. So,
It's wonderful. And just to say, and again, in gratitude to Mark here, when Mark talks about the difference has to do with the density of the local ether array. Remember, when we say that, you're going to the next dimension, what that literally means is when the next dimension of superposed spin of charge is superposed as an envelope, shows up another harmonic, then it becomes more compressed here. For example, our solar equator lines up with the galactic equator, and the galactic equator then lines up with the supergalactic equator. So that nesting of equators, one within the other, when they go to right angles, for example, called the erection of the Holy Cross, Nick Fiorenza, this enables longer wave compression, exactly in the same way that sunrise, sunset, if you use your attention at the right sacred moment there, you get much expanded awareness. Now you do that at equinox solstice, you get an even longer wave superposed. But now suppose you did that when the galactic equators have lined up. Now the ancients understood all of this because they wanted to be that longer wave.
Hmm.
The next
Okay.
dimension. This is ascension. Well, thank you very much. We're glad you came. We hope you have some more intuitions now about this concept of embedding into the array and are more encouraged to take a look at fractalgut.com and really see that with this discovery of the physics of charge collapse, the origin of all centripetal and negentropic forces, Planck and golden ratio fractality, that there's a whole world of both physical and spiritual ideas that open up that can really empower humanity.
I agree, and thank you for your persistence. And how many years you been doing this, Dan? When did you
Oh,
start?
I'm only 29 now, but no. Hey, I must say you're looking really good, Mark.
Oh, thanks. It's all because of Liz is helping. She makes
That's
things
very,
nice for the doggies and me. So
oh, it's
she,
been wonderful. Thank you so much, Mark. Blessings,
yeah,
blessings,
yeah,
everyone.
yeah. We'll do another one because we're gonna get right down to the able to make some so someone can duplicate anything they can dream of, you know.
That's right. All the principles are there. We can answer the questions. It's really amazing. So
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah.
To be continued. Blessings, everybody. We're available for questions. Call on
Okay.
us. Take care.
Okay.
Blessings.
Take care. Bye.
Bye bye.